Hi. So we're going to begin to talk about chapters 4 through 6. See how far get through on this video. But chapter 4, client-centered foundation. So at this point, it's important to look at the any gap there may be, moral or philosophical gap that there may be between your beliefs, how you view addiction and those who abuse substances, and any way these might detract from the treatment process. In other words, where are you with addiction, what you believe about it, what you believe about those who are suffering from addiction. And you want to be clear about that with yourself and obviously with your clients. So is there any gap to bridge here between you and the client? You need to get a handle on that. And as the authors say, empathy may be the most important variable here. Are you able to feel empathy for the addicted client? And I mean, this is no different than your work with any other clients, whatever the presenting problem may be. But, in addiction treatment, clients may be bringing much more baggage with them, or in some cases, it's our baggage we have to deal with, our values, our judgment of them. So it's important to understand and to get past that. So empathy and addiction, and the authors here go back to Carl Rogers, the sort of founding father of client-centered therapy, to look at how he approaches empathy as a way for us to begin to understand how we need to be in our relationship with the addicted client. Let me read to you the definition of empathy from the book. The ability to listen to your clients and accurately reflect back to them the essence and meaning of what they have said. So reflection is the key here. And this is not new to you, I'm sure, from other courses, from training and work that you have done. But it's important. And so Rogerian therapy, which is been going on for decades, reflective listening was an important part of that. So in reflection, the first thing that we have to do is to guess at what the client has said. What do we think the client said? Reflect it back to the client, and that allows them, if you're correct in your guess, to go on. In other words, they're saying A to you, you say A to them, they understand that you understand, they're going to move on. If you're not right, they'll let you know. And so in that way, you're gaining an understanding of what they're saying, you're reflecting it back to them. You're not analyzing it or assessing it, telling them what you think it means to them, but rather what they have said. So proper reflection is a statement, not a question. But on pages 53 and 54, you can see examples of how these sound differently. Rather than "you're angry with me," "you're angry with me." And that, again, allows the client to just keep moving forward, and there's not a lot of back and forth in that way. So not asking them to respond, but rather reflecting back to them. And so on page 54 in this chapter, there's an example here that you've seen of a back and forth between a client and a therapist where reflective listening is illustrated. So make sure you take another look at that. Now on page 55, again, let me, bear with me, let me read you one short thing here, a nice summary of the concept. When you're listening with accurate empathy, there are also a lot of things you're not doing. You're not giving advice, offering solutions, or asking questions. Neither are you warning, educating, persuading, or sympathizing. You're not agreeing or disagreeing, analyzing or diagnosing. Your whole attention is focused on understanding and following the person's own perspective and that's work enough in itself. End of quote, again on page 55. So it's as much about what you're not doing as what you are doing is the key point being made here. Excuse me. We give the acronym of OARS in this chapter, OARS, open questions, affirming, reflecting, summarizing, as a good way to look at this process of reflection. Box 4.2 on page 57 gives you examples of how open questions might be framed. Last concept from the chapter I want to highlight is this German concept of Menschenbild, or one's own picture of people. How do you see other people? And this kind of takes us back to the first point I made here about the moral judgments and how we have to understand where we're coming from. And so how do we see these people that we're wanting to help and to treat? We need to understand it. In this context, we need to be aware of the potential omniscience of the therapist, taking on a sort of God-like attitude toward the client, as if I know best. This is who you are. This is what you need. I know what you need. I'm going to help you get there. So we need to understand how we are viewing the client, so they don't get into that kind of a bind. The first reaction question at the end of the chapter is one that I'd want to highlight and have you take a look at, and maybe you want to post something. And it says, given your life experience thus far, how optimistic or pessimistic do you feel about the likelihood that people will recover from addiction? In other words, what is your Menschenbild about addiction? What do you see when you see an addicted person? How does that influence your response? The way in which you're going to try and engage with them. So again, we want to understand ourselves so that we can connect and engage with the client in the most efficient way. Okay, so that's chapter 4. Let's let me talk. It's not like you're getting a chance to answer me here, which of course you can do in your postings and other ways. But let's go on to chapter 5, screening, evaluation, and diagnosis. As it's suggested here in the chapter, you can think about screening as the beginning of treatment. This is the first step. I was in a training with Bill Miller, one of our authors in the textbook here, back in 2007 it was, and he gave an example of how screening fits in and how the treatment process can begin. Excuse me. And what he was looking at was the clinic that he was running, and saying that the first person that a client encountered when they walked into the clinic was most often not a clinician, but rather it was a receptionist, it was an admin person, maybe it was an intern, and that person would give the client forms, get information from them, just talk to them about what the clinic had to offer, and then the client would wait and would ultimately see the intake clinician or therapist and begin to talk about why they were there. And Miller thought that this was backwards, or that it was not the best way to do it, and so he moved clinical staff to the front desk. And so the first person that any client met with when they walked in the door was a trained therapist. That person would often do some of the things, of course, that admin person was doing before, but they did it with the clinical understanding of addiction in the client. And so that maybe then was the person who actually conducted the entire intake and screening during the initial stages of this person being in this clinic. And what he found was that improved retention in this treatment program. Clients engaged more quickly, stayed longer, may or may not have done better in the long run, but in terms of retention in treatment, much higher level of retention because of this changing around just how clients were met when they walked in. There are examples given here of screening instruments, the MAST, the DAST, the SASE, the audit. I don't think the SASE is mentioned in here, but it's one you may be familiar with. And so these initial screening instruments are more inclusive than others that you'll use later on. In other words, we're going to capture more people with these screening instruments. And this is a good way just to make sure that we are not missing anybody. On the initial screening, it may show that there's an indication to go further, but a full assessment may rule them out later on. So these instruments can be administered by non-clinicians. Many of them are self-administered, pencil and paper tests, short questions. Some of the, like the CAGE, is 4 questions. And so this is a good way to get started and get some preliminary information. There are biological tools that are used in screening also, urinalysis, dipsticks, which can do quick screening now and find whether there are any of these substances on board. Person may or may not be under the influence at that time, but we may be able to detect them. Now, confirmation of these screenings is important. GC mass spec confirmation, which takes more time, but is much more sophisticated scientific measure of whether or not somebody has been using these substances. So we can get some screening information, but eventually confirmation is better. Now, the usefulness of any urine testing depends upon the half-life of the substance we're talking about. A stimulant like cocaine is going to metabolize very quickly. A person may have used cocaine 24 hours ago. You do a screening and you don't find any because it has been metabolized. A drug like marijuana, which is going to rest in the fat cells much longer, is going to be picked up over a longer period of time. The cutoff level that's used in these tests, if we get to GC mass spec confirmation, is going to matter. If you set the cutoff level too high, you're going to miss some use that way. So these are helpful. They're indicators. It's a way for you to give the client these facts. Okay, you are testing positive for heroin or whatever it may be. Now, so this may be all the initial screening. If we move on to broader means of evaluation, you'll recall back in Chapter 2, there were the 7 dimensions of addiction. Well, in this chapter, you can link those 7 dimensions of addiction to the 4 dimensions of assessment. Box 5.1 on page 72 gives you an illustration of this. And again, you can take those 7 dimensions of addiction and link them to these 4 dimensions of assessment. And it kind of takes you through the loop of the process here. And you're going to begin with looking at the nature and severity of the use. How serious is this use? So instruments like the Drinker's Inventory and the Addiction Severity Index are cited here, and they can help you determine how serious the problem is and whether medical intervention is indicated. And then you're going to look at the motivation. Instruments like the Eureka, the Stages of Change instrument, can be used to determine, is the person pre-contemplative? Are they not really in a position where they're looking to make a change? Or are they farther along? They may have been in treatment before. They may have been detoxed before. And so they're further along the continuum of motivation to change and may be ready to make their move, so to speak, into treatment. What kind of resources does the client have? Some have none. Some don't know what resources they have. What resources can you help find for them? This is the next step in looking at what are we going to do with this person? How important is it to them to make the change? What resources are available? And doing a functional analysis. What has addiction done for this person? Maybe they're positive things that addiction has done for them. Maybe it's a major stress reliever for them. And is staving off depression in some way. It's temporary, of course, but nonetheless, that's the way they're looking at it. It may be that it keeps them from acting out violently. They're using a depressant that's sedating them and calming them down. These are not ways to deal with these problems, but the point is that that's why the client is doing it. So you need to understand what they think they're doing with their substance use and what good it is doing for them. Good. And of course, there are negative consequences that we want to look at, medical problems and other things. So box 5.4 on page 80, 81 and 82 gives you a summary of different types of instruments that can be used in screening and evaluation. And most of them are in the public domain. So if you're interested in looking at them, you can download them or just go on the internet and look at them yourself. The reflection questions or reaction questions at the end. Question number 3 is interesting. Take a look at that. What information do you really need in order to begin treatment? Keeping in mind that sometimes less is more. It may not be necessary to be gathering extensive information to actually begin the treatment process. So I'll end it here, do another video for chapter 6.